She was repairing the fence post by the south gate when I first saw her properly. Not passing by, not at a distance, right there, 10 yards from the road, driving a post mallet with both hands, her dark hair coming loose from its pins in the September wind. A woman alone, the post going in straight, the mallet coming down clean, no wasted motion. I pulled the wagon to a stop. She didn't look up. That was the first thing I noticed. A woman alone on a road in Harlan County, Wyoming, in the autumn of 1886, with a stranger's wagon stopped 20 feet from her, and she did not look up. Not because she hadn't heard, because she was finishing what she'd started, and finishing it mattered more than whatever I might want. I sat there a moment longer than I should have. Then I drove on, but I thought about those fence posts the whole way home. My name is Samuel Holt. I had been running the Holt Ranch in the Powder River Basin for 19 years. The land my father had homesteaded in 1862 and left to me when the consumption took him in the winter of 1871, which left me with 400 acres, 60 head of cattle, 2 horses that had seen better days, and a mortgage that had not. I had built it into something real. 800 acres by 1880, 140 head, the 2 horses replaced by 7, one of which my eldest, Thomas, had broken himself at the age of 14, which is the kind of thing that makes a man think he might have done something right. I had 3 children, Thomas, 15, quiet like his mother, steady like the land, already more useful than most grown men. Nora, 11, all her mother's stubbornness with none of her mother's patience, which made her difficult and extraordinary in approximately equal measure, and Daniel, 7 years old, too young to understand what he'd lost, and old enough to feel the shape of it exactly. Their mother, Catherine, had died in March of 1885, 18 months before the day I saw the woman with the fence post and the mallet and the dark hair coming loose in the wind, the fever, 3 weeks. I had not left the house for any of it. She had asked me once, near the end, to take the children to her sister's for the night. I had done it. She died at noon the next day, alone, because she had not wanted them to see it. I had not forgiven myself for that yet. I was not sure I ever would. Her name was Ada Crane. I learned this from the postmaster in Clearfield, a man named Birch, who knew every piece of land in the county and everyone who lived on it and most people who were only passing through. Birch said Ada Crane had come from Ohio. He said her husband, a farmer named Robert Crane, had died of a snake bite in August, which was the kind of death that felt wrong in its smallness, a thing that should not have been enough to end a man. He said she had no family here, no family anywhere that she had mentioned. He said she had been trying to make a go of the Crane place alone for 6 weeks. I said, "How's that working?" Birch said, "About how you'd expect." I did not go to see her. That would not have been right. A widow 6 weeks out, and a widower 18 months. The arithmetic was not the same. She was still in it. I knew what still in it looked like. I had been in it myself. You don't knock on that door. But the following Thursday, I was driving past the Crane property on my way to the feed store in Clearfield, and I saw that the section of fence she had been working on the week before had been finished. 6 posts, clean and straight, wire run and tensioned properly. I stopped the wagon. I looked at that fence line for a moment. I drove on. The week after that, one of those posts had gone over in the wind. She had it back in before I got home. The week after that, I was driving past in the early morning, and I saw her in the near pasture, moving a small herd of cattle from the north section to the south. She had a dog working with her, a red heeler, quick and sensible, and she was reading the cattle the way you only learn to read cattle after years of it. Unhurried, patient, positioned correctly before the animal made its move. That was the second thing I noticed about her. She was good at this work. She had not come to Wyoming unprepared. The first time I spoke to her was at the Clearfield General Store on a Friday afternoon in late October. She was at the counter with a list. The list was short. I noticed that without meaning to. The list of a woman buying carefully, stretching what she had. I was at the counter waiting to collect a parcel. We stood 3 feet apart and did not speak, the way strangers do when standing is necessary and words are not. Then she miscounted her change. Not by much, 2 cents short. She counted it twice, quickly, and then looked at the figure on the counter, and then at the storekeeper, a man named Haggerty, who was a decent man but who had a way of watching women manage money that made it clear he didn't believe they should. I put 2 cents on the counter. She looked at them, then at me. I said, "Samuel Holt. I run the ranch east of the Draper property." She said, "I know who you are." She picked up her parcel. "Ada Crane." I said, "I know who you are." She said, "Then we've introduced ourselves twice." She put the 2 cents back on the counter toward me. "Thank you, but no." She left. Haggerty looked at me. I picked up my 2 cents. I thought, well, Malware, I told Thomas about her that evening at the supper table. I did not know why I told him. He was 15 and had the same expression his mother used to make when she was waiting for you to get to the point. He said, "Why'd she give back the 2 cents?" I said, "Because she could manage." He thought about that. "But she couldn't. She was 2 cents short." I said, "That's not the same thing." He thought about it a moment longer. "No," he said, "I guess it's not." Nora was listening from the corner where she was pretending to mend a sock. "Is she nice?" she asked. I said, "I don't know yet." Nora said, "Daniel wants a dog." I said, "I know that. This has nothing to do with that." She went back to her sock. "I'm just saying." Amale nodded Minden. The first snow came early that year, 2nd week of November, 1.5 feet in 2 days, which is manageable if you have the hands and the feed and the fences that will hold the weight. I had all 3. I had Thomas and 2 hired men and a barn that I had rebuilt in 1883 specifically because the old one would not have survived another hard winter. I thought about the Crane place. The Crane place was 2 miles west. It had a barn that was older than the one I'd replaced. It had 1 woman and a red heeler. I did not go to check on her. That was not my place. But on the 3rd morning after the snow, I drove past on my way to the north section and saw no smoke from her chimney. I stopped the wagon. There is a specific feeling that comes when you see a chimney with no smoke on a morning that is 12 degrees. It is not exactly fear. It is a calculation that happens faster than fear, that arrives at a conclusion before you have decided to be worried. I tied the wagon and walked to the door. I knocked. 30 seconds. She opened the door. She was wearing 2 coats and had a blanket over her shoulders, and her hands were cold enough that her fingers were white at the tips. She looked at me. I said, "Your chimney's not drawing." She said, "I know." I said, "Have you got wood?" A pause. "Enough." I said, "The flues probably froze at the top. Happens with these older chimneys in the first hard snap." I looked past her at the stove. "Takes about 20 minutes to fix if you have a long-handled brush." She was quiet. I said, "I have one in the wagon." Another pause. Longer. The particular pause of a woman calculating what accepting help costs and what refusing it costs, and whether either cost is the right one. She stepped back from the door. "Willful hemlily Sisel." She stood at the bottom of the ladder and handed things up when I asked for them, and did not offer unnecessary conversation, which I appreciated. When the flue was clear and the stove was drawing properly, she put a kettle on without asking if I wanted coffee. I took that as a good sign. We sat at her kitchen table. The house was small, clean in the way of a person who will not let circumstances make them careless, a book open on the table, a piece of harness being mended on the chair by the window, the tools of someone who was managing, actually managing, in the specific sense of not letting anything fall behind that could be caught up. She said, "How much do I owe you?" I said, "Nothing." She looked at me. I said, "I have a frozen flu now and then. Somebody always helps. It's that kind of country." She considered that. She was not sure whether to believe it. "It's that kind of country," she repeated, like she was testing the weight of it. I said, "Yes, ma'am." She drank her coffee. I drank mine. She said, "You have children." I said, 3. She said, "The boy who rides the gray horse to school." I said, "Thomas." She said, "He rides well for 15. I said, "He's been doing it since he was 9. He worked harder at it than anything I ever asked him to." She was quiet for a moment. "The girl," she said. "Dark hair, argues with the teacher." I said, "Nora." She almost smiled. "Not quite." "She argues correctly," she said. "That's the thing about her. She's usually right." I said, "I know. Don't tell her." This time she did smile. Small, brief, gone quickly, the way things go quickly when you're not sure yet whether you're allowed to have them. I finished my coffee. I stood up. She said, "Mr. Holt." I stopped. She said, "Thank you." She said it the way the 2 cents had gone back across the counter. Not easily, but honestly. I said, "Samuel." She looked at me. I said, "If we're going to be neighbors." She looked at her coffee cup. "Ada," she said. "Muldam thou." November became December. I did not go back to see her. That would have been too much too soon, and I had a sense, from the fence posts, from the 2 cents, from the way she'd stood at the bottom of the ladder and not spoken unless spoken to, that Ada Crane had a finely calibrated sense of what was too much and what was not enough, and that if I tipped either direction I would lose whatever ground I'd been given. But on a Thursday morning, 2 weeks before Christmas, I found a wrapped package on my porch, a jar of preserved plums and a half loaf of dark bread, still slightly warm. No note. I brought it inside. I set it on the table. Thomas looked at it. He looked at me. He said nothing. He was 15 and he had his mother's eyes. I said, "Don't." He picked up his hat and went outside. Nora from the hallway said, "Can we eat it?" I said, "Yes." Daniel said, "Is it from the lady with the dog?" I said, "Eat your breakfast." Eat your breakfast. Christmas came and went. I brought the children to Clearfield for the service on Christmas morning and sat 3 rows back from Ada Crane, who sat alone in the 4th row with her hands folded and her back straight and looked at no one in particular, the way people look who have decided that looking at no one in particular is easier than looking at the empty space beside them. I knew that look. I had worn it for 18 months. After the service, the congregation moved to the yard. People spoke to each other. Children ran in the light snow. Thomas went immediately to the horses. Daniel followed. Nora stood beside me with her arms crossed, evaluating everything with the professional thoroughness of an 11-year-old who has decided she is in charge of something, though she hasn't yet decided what. Ada Crane came out of the church alone. Mrs. Birch from the postmaster's wife said something to her, warmly, and Ada responded warmly. And then Mrs. Birch was pulled away by her grandchildren, and Ada was standing alone in the churchyard in December, with her hands folded and that particular expression. I walked over. I said, "Merry Christmas." She said, "Thank you for the visit, and for the—" I said, "Chimney needed fixing." She looked at me. "I was going to thank you for the tools you left on my porch." I had left a long-handled chimney brush on her porch a week after the flu incident. Just the brush, no note. I said, "You might need it again." She said, "You could have knocked." I said, "You might not have answered." A pause. "No," she said, "I probably wouldn't have." We stood there a moment. The children ran past. Snow fell in the mild, indifferent way of snow that means nothing in particular. She said, "Your children are good." I said, "They have days." She said, "All children have days." She watched Nora, who was organizing a group of younger children into some kind of game with the focused authority of someone born to manage things. She'll run something someday. I said, "A county, probably." This time the smile stayed a little longer. Valorous Tromchud. January was the hard month. It always is in the Powder River Basin. The cold is not dramatic. It doesn't announce itself. It simply arrives and remains, a permanent fact of the landscape. The way grief remains, not loudly, but as a condition of everything. I was in the south pasture on a Tuesday morning in the 3rd week of January when I heard a horse coming fast on the road, too fast for the road conditions. Ice patches. A horse running on ice in a hurry is a horse that belongs to someone in a hurry they didn't plan to be in. I rode out to the road. It was her red heeler, actually, not a horse, running on the road toward my property, with the specific directional certainty of a dog that has been sent somewhere. I looked toward the Crane place, smoke coming from the chimney, so not the flue again. But there was a light in the barn that shouldn't be there at mid-morning. I rode over. Ahurjit the sound. 2 of her cattle were down. The water trough in the near barn had frozen solid overnight, not at the surface, which was the manageable kind, but at the intake pipe, which is the kind that takes the whole system and doesn't let go. The cattle had been without water since the night before. 2 had gone down. not dead, not yet, but down. She was on her knees in the stall with the smaller one, a 2-year-old heifer, and she was keeping the animal warm the only way available to her in that moment, which was with her body. Her coat was over the animal. She had been there a while. Her hands were white again. She looked up when I came in. She said, "The intake pipe." I said, "I see it." I said, "Can you keep her warm for 20 more minutes?" She said yes. I rode back to my place, got Thomas, got the tools, got 2 hands worth of old blankets from the barn, and a bucket of warm water from the kitchen that Nora had already started heating because she had watched me ride out and ride back and drawn her own conclusions. Thomas and I fixed the pipe in 35 minutes. The cattle came back in an hour and a half, both of them. Ada was on her feet by then, her coat back on, standing at the stall door watching the heifer drink. She watched for a long time, then she said, quietly, to no one in particular, "I'm not sure I can do this alone." She hadn't meant to say it to me. I don't think she'd meant to say it at all. It came out the way true things come out when a person is cold and tired and has been holding something too long. I did not respond immediately. I understood the arithmetic of that kind of admission, what it costs, what the silence after it costs. I said, "You've been doing it alone for 5 months." She said, "I know." I said, "That's not nothing." She said, "It's not enough." The barn settled around us in the cold. She said, "I have no family left. My husband's people are in Indiana, and they were never my people. My own family." She stopped. "I have no family left." She said it quietly, not for sympathy, just as a fact, the way you state a fact you have been carrying long enough that it no longer makes you cry. I looked at the heifer. I said, "Funny." She looked at me. I said, "My children need a mother." She looked at me. I looked at her. I said, "That's not, I didn't mean it the way it sounded. I meant," I stopped. I was 51 years old and I was making a mess of something which I had not done out loud in a very long time. She said, "How did you mean it?" I said, "Honestly." A Werbens with his Hayward inquest. The cold pressed in from the barn walls. The heifer finished drinking and stood up. The red heeler lay down in the straw near the door the way dogs lie down when they have decided the emergency is over. She said, "You have 3 children." I said, "Yes." She said, "Nora doesn't like most people." I said, "No." She said, "She liked me." I said, "I know. She told me." Ada looked at the barn wall. She was thinking about something. I did not know what. I waited. She said, "I'll need to think about it." I said, "Of course." She said, "I don't mean a week." I said, "I know." She said, "I mean I need to know who you are." I said, "That's reasonable." "A were one." She said, "You could start by stopping to talk instead of leaving things on the porch." I said, "I wasn't sure you'd answer the door." She said, "I would have." I said, "Then I'll knock next time." She said, "See that you do." Des Middlements. Then spring came. The kind of Montana spring that arrives without ceremony. The creek rising 4 inches in 3 days, the mud making every road a decision, the aspens along the north ridge coming in pale green with the particular color of things that are new and don't know it yet. I knocked on her door twice in February, 3 times in March, 4 times in April, once without any reason other than that I was driving past and decided to knock. She answered every time. We talked about cattle in February, about the school and whether Nora's teacher was going to survive the term in March, about the East Ridge and whether I should run more head there in summer, which she had an opinion about that turned out to be correct in April. The children came with me in March, once, on a Saturday. Thomas assessed the Crane place with the thorough attention of a boy who has been running cattle beside his father for 6 years and knows what a place needs. He didn't say anything. He helped fix the gate hinge on the near pasture fence without being asked. Nora and Ada sat at the kitchen table for an hour. I don't know what they talked about. I was outside. When I came in, Nora was helping Ada with something at the stove, and there was no performance about it, no effort, no introduction. Just 2 people who had already decided something and were getting on with it. Daniel fell asleep on Ada's dog. Ada looked at him, just looked, for a moment. The way you look at something that has crept up on you and made itself at home before you noticed. She looked at me. I did not say anything. She went back to what she was doing. Why, Yov, the offer came in April. Not from me, from her. She had come to the Holt Ranch on a Sunday afternoon with a pie, apple, the first of the season, and we were sitting on the porch with the mountains out in front of us and the children somewhere in the barn doing whatever children do when they have decided not to be supervised. She said, "I've been thinking about what you said in January." I said, "The part where I made a mess of it." She said, "Yes," a pause. The sentiment was sound. I said, "I meant every word of it." She said, "I know." She looked at the mountains. I have been alone for a long time. Before Robert died, too. He was not a bad man, but we were not. She stopped. "I don't know how to do what you're talking about, Samuel. I've never done it right." I said, "I've done it right once. I'm not sure that qualifies me to do it again." She said, "Catherine." I said, "Yes." She said, "What was she like?" I said, "Stubborn, smarter than she let on. Nora has her face and none of her patience, which is accurate." Ada almost smiled. I said, "She would have liked you." She looked at me. I said, "Not kindly, necessarily. But she had a good eye for people, and she would have looked at your fence posts and said something about them." She said, "What would she have said?" I said, "She would have said the line is straighter than mine. She would have been right." Ada looked at the mountains for a while. She said, "The children would have to choose. I won't take that from them." I said, "Nora has already chosen. Thomas won't object. He would have said so by now. Daniel would follow a capable adult anywhere. I think he'd follow your dog." She said, "The healer sleeps inside." I said, "Nora won't mind." A pause. "I would need my own place to manage." I said, "The Crane property adjoins mine at the east line. You'd manage it as your own." She said, "I would need—" She stopped. I waited. She said, "I would need this to be what it looks like." I said, "What does it look like?" She said, "Like two people who are trying to build something that lasts." I said, "That's what it is." Mountains held the last of the afternoon sun on their high peaks. Somewhere in the barn, Daniel laughed at something, a clean sound, uncomplicated. She said, "All right." She said it the way she'd said thank you in December, not easily, but honestly. I said, "All right." She picked up her coffee. I picked up mine. We sat on the porch and watched the mountains go gold. We were married in June, in the churchyard in Clearfield, under the cottonwoods that were fully leafed by then. Thomas stood beside me. Nora stood beside Ada and kept her composure for approximately 3 minutes before her expression gave away the fact that she was the happiest person in the churchyard, which she would have denied if asked. Daniel wore his good shirt and held the ring. Ada wore a blue dress she had made herself from fabric she'd ordered from the catalog in March, which meant she had been planning since March, which I found out later and which I kept to myself. After the service, in the yard, Mrs. Birch's husband, the postmaster, came up to me and said, "Didn't expect this." I said, "Neither did I." He said, "How'd it happen?" I said, "She had a frozen flu." He considered that. "That's not a lot to go on." I said, "It was enough." The years moved in the way that years move when you stop counting them against what you've lost and start counting them alongside what you have. Thomas took over the North Section management at 17. He did not ask for it. He simply began doing it, the way he'd fixed Ada's gate hinge on that first Saturday, without ceremony, without waiting to be invited. Nora, who argued correctly and usually was right, did eventually run something, a school first, then the county board. Then, in the years after I am writing this, other things that I won't know about because the future is not mine to see. Daniel and the Red Healer were inseparable for 11 years, which is as long as the dog lived. The healer died in the winter of 1897 and was buried near the east fence line where the two properties joined, which was Ada's idea and which was the right one. Ada managed the Crane property alongside mine for 3 years. In the 4th year, the fence line between them came down at her suggestion. By then, there was no meaningful distinction between the two places. They had grown into each other the way things grow when they've been placed close enough and given enough time. She was not Catherine. She was not trying to be. She was Ada, with her fence posts and her 2 cents and her Red Healer and her particular way of listening to a problem and then fixing it without editorial. She was the woman who had been on her knees in a cold barn keeping a heifer alive with her body heat, who had said, "I have no family left," in the voice of someone stating a fact they have carried too long. She had family now. We all did. Anathemadum. I am writing this in the winter of 1898, in the house that my father built and I rebuilt, and that now has more rooms than when I started, and better fences and a barn that will outlast all of us. Ada is at the table across from me, going through the accounts. The red heeler is buried out by the east fence. There is a younger dog now, also red, that Daniel brought home 2 years ago, that sleeps in the same spot by the stove. The mountains outside the window are the same mountains. The accounts are in better order than they've ever been. And on Tuesday mornings, when the weather allows, Ada still walks out to the south fence and checks the posts. Not because they need it, because she built that habit before this was her place, and some habits are worth keeping because of what they say about who you are when you're not sure yet where you belong. The posts are straight. They have been straight for 12 years. That is, I have come to understand exactly the right amount of time to know that they will stay that way. Mums tum file with istungens port. The part she said after. When I'd made a mess of what I was trying to say, and she'd asked me what I meant, and I'd said honestly. In the long silence that followed, before she said she needed to think about it, she looked at me with an expression that I have thought about since. Not gratitude, not relief, not the expression of a person being rescued. The expression of a person who has been carrying something heavy and has just been offered the chance to set it down, and is deciding whether setting it down is the kind of thing they do. She set it down. That took more courage than fixing any fence post. Wherever you are, I hope you've got someone to set things down with. And if you haven't yet, I hope you know that the offer sometimes comes from the direction you weren't watching. In a barn, in January, from a neighbor with a chimney brush. That's all it was. That was everything.